All right, welcome back to a very special episode of Form Check Friday. Now, Form Check Friday has been a very long-running series. We've done well over 200 episodes of viewer-submitted emails, lifting videos, critiques, coaching. We've had guests. We've done form checks in different locations and had other friends on here. This is going to be the last episode of Form Check Friday. I can qualify that a little bit by saying it's going to be the last episode of Form Check Friday on this channel, and it's going to be the last time we focus on doing Form Check Fridays, at least for some time. As always, this video is brought to you by Bells of Steel. We're going to have a little more on them later, but let's get into it. We can talk a little more about other stuff after a couple critiques here. So, Dylan, who's first up?
First up is Jamie.
Jamie's
squatting. Jamie has been doing strength training for around 8 months and is loving it so far.
Good.
He did a local/novice comp, which has motivated him a bunch to improve and start bulking up a weight class.
Okay.
Any feedback is thoroughly appreciated on squatting. He feels like his confidence and form tends to break a little on the heavier weight, and it's been a lift that's been slower to progress compared to his deadlift. He has quite a bit of knee caving, and his right side tends to lag/angle. He's found that narrowing his stance helps and is wondering if he should narrow it even more to compensate for the caving and to get to depth more comfortably.
Okay. So what I'm seeing here, honestly, is a really good, solid squat, right? I think you're hitting depth, what looks like pretty comfortably. Your overall positioning, you're hinging, you're sitting back. Really common thing to see from more novice lifters is they just drive their knees forward and they try to stay super upright. Jamie, you're sitting back, you're sitting into your hips and hamstrings a little bit. You're getting a pretty good overall squat here. I think that things like confidence are going to come with time and practice and more reps under the bar. Maybe that's not the beautiful quick fix kind of answer that you might be looking for, but I honestly think the biggest thing here is just getting more reps in, staying committed. Like you said, bulking up a little bit, moving up a weight class, definitely going to help the squat. It always does. The only other thing that I see here as being maybe a bit of a limiting factor is going to be the upper back and hand position, right? Like I think your grip width is a little on the narrow side, and you'll see here as you descend, these elbows are coming up behind you, meaning the shoulder blades are rolling up the rib cage, and we're going into a little bit more of a sort of flexed upper back position, right? And you can see here, as you come up, you're really having to fight to keep that bar from rolling forwards on you. So I think if you can potentially widen your grip a little bit, try to keep those elbows kind of in alongside your torso a little bit more, I think you're gonna have a more consistent position in the upper back. And that might allow you to stay a little more tightly braced. It might allow you to see a little bit less movement in the knees. Although I think what we're seeing there is not necessarily a bad thing. I don't think that, we're losing all that much position. And I think given that this is, a third attempt squat, we do expect to see some technique breakdown, right? If your third attempt squat looks perfect, either you didn't put enough weight on the bar or, you've been doing this for a lot of years and you're able to execute perfectly at top end loads. But, the latter is definitely not the case, right? You mentioned that you've just been doing this for 8 months. So trust yourself, keep getting reps in, trust the process, and maybe work around with the sort of upper back and stuff. But biggest thing is just welcome to the community. I hope you have a great time, pushing yourself, learning to lift, and it's a hell of a ride. So welcome. In this downtime, I might take a quick sec just to give another shout out to our sponsor for Form Check Friday, and that is Bells of Steel. If you're not sure who Bells of Steel are or what they do, they're a Calgary-based company. They are for strength athletes, by strength athletes. I remember back in the day, Kayvon, who now owns and operates Bells of Steel, was one of the big organizers and one of the people who put on this awesome thing in Calgary here called the Festival of Strength. It was a combination powerlifting meet and strongman show, and they had kettlebell sport, and they had CrossFit, and it just mashed everything together and was a fantastic weekend. I think I pulled my first 700-pound deadlift at Festival of Strength. They also manufacture and sell some pretty fantastic strength training equipment. You'll see a lot of it around here. If you've seen our vlogs, you know we use it a lot. The black machined plates are chef's kiss, just beautiful. And our old gym owner at the Strength Edge actually went through and weighed each one. And I think by the time you got about 4 on there, they were as good as calibrated plates. They're machined, so they are within a very small deviation from the weight listed on the plate, which is, that might sound like a given, but it's not the norm with pound plates necessarily. So anyways, they make good stuff. Shipping is affordable. They ship from the United States or from Canada. They got a showroom here in Canada and a couple in the States as well. You can check them out at bellsofsteel.com or bellsofsteel.us if you're in the States. So shout out to them for bringing the last number of Form Check Fridays to you. And Dylan, who do we got next?
Next up, we have Scott. This is a 82.5 kilo bench, and Scott is a master's lifter.
Okay.
Scott has been powerlifting for 2 years and has 6 meets under his belt.
Nice.
His bench is more consistent now, but he has a very slow descent, especially when going over 110 kilos. He has tried several cues: bend the bar, spread the bar, row the bar, accept the weight, but nothing seems to click. Is it a technique issue, or does he just need to get more jacked?
Well, I'm going to start off by saying always get more jacked. That's never a bad thing. There's a couple things here that might, be worth exploring. Now, overall, I think your bench technique is quite solid. I think you're doing a pretty good job of, most of the fundamentals of benching. The one thing I notice on this first rep where we have the side angle is that about there, we start to not only loosen and bring the bar down pretty quickly, but we also start to see that bar drift further here when compared to the elbow angle, right? So in this touch, the elbow is coming back as we touch the chest, and the bar is going out this way, which means we're gonna have to use a lot more delt and a lot more force in general to get the bar to come back in the direction we want off the chest. So my biggest recommendation there is, see how this forearm angle changes from being a little more straight up and down to now it's here, right? When we think about the action of, the pressing muscles, the delts, the pecs, etc., essentially what's happening is we're gonna get upward pressure here. If we have upward pressure on this point and we have a weight out here, that weight is gonna list or sort of fall or naturally go out this way, away from the shoulders, away from the direction we want to press. If we have it a little more stacked, if we have that shoulder angle more similar, forearm angle, my apologies, more similar to how it was a little bit earlier in the movement, right? If we are a little more patient in the bottom part of the press and maybe use some long pause presses, practice doing some lighter touch pressing, even if that's not necessarily a rote change that you're gonna make to your bench press, doing some light touch work can really help you figure out how to build tension and maintain tension in the bottom. Now, the other thing is when we look here, we almost are getting into what I would say looks a little bit like over-tuck territory. So we're over-tucking a little bit on the way down, and then we're getting to the bottom, and then we're getting loose, and we're letting the elbows kind of flare out. What I'd like to see is a little less a little less tuck on the way down, a little more of your elbows kind of out towards the walls. But as you get into the chest, think about getting a little bit of that tuck. Right now, we're really tucked in the earlier part of the press, and then we flare when we get on the chest. And I would say doing those things kind of in the opposite order is gonna be what we want, right? We wanna be a little more flared earlier in the press as we bring it down, and then it's gonna feel like we're tucking as you get into the touch in order to keep really good tension in the upper back and to keep, sort of reaching that chest up into the bar. Again, I think having some lighter touch work where you're forced to maintain that tension and maintain the weight of the bar in your hands, control the touch a little bit more, I think a lot of those things are gonna help quite a bit. And lastly, I would say, yes, like I said, always get more jacked. Getting more jacked is never a bad thing. One of the, bench is a lift where it seems to respond especially well to upper body accessory work, upper body bodybuilding style stuff. For a lot of people, can help push that volume on the upper body. The upper body tends to be able to tolerate a little bit more volume and a little bit more of that accessory volume specifically. So, that's never a bad route to go either. Now, I mentioned earlier that this is going to be the last Form Check Friday. And to qualify that, it's going to be the last Form Check Friday on the Calgary Barbell channel. What we're doing with the Calgary Barbell channel is we're going to try to focus on the stuff that we think is the best content to be making. It might be a little bit longer between videos. It might be less content overall, but we really want to try to put a lot of work and effort into putting out the really polished and meaningful stuff that we think is what we want to make and what people want to see. So we are going to have a separate channel. If you look up Form Check Friday, there is a channel dedicated to it. And at some point we will be getting rolling with more Form Check Fridays. They're just going to be specifically on that channel and not on this one. So that's how that's going to go. Thanks to everybody for, tuning in for a wild ride with 200 and however many episodes of Form Check Friday. So that being said, what's next, Dill?
Next up is Daniel.
Daniel's deadlift.
Daniel is trying to get strength back up after a couple of injuries and is working on his technique along the way. He's experimenting with trying to get air before he sets his hips. He feels like he's able to get more air and build better pressure this way, but feels like he's letting his back round too much when setting his hips and pulling the slack, making the lockout really slow on heavier weights.
Okay.
When he looks at his warm-up sets without a belt, it looks like he's setting his back better and feels a bit off with the belt on.
Okay. So first thing, I would say try loosening the belt a little bit. A lot of times having the belt there as sort of an external feedback is going to change the way we perceive our trunk and our position and some of that kind of stuff. So it can really change how we're bracing overall and how we're positioning overall. The other thing, just looking at your deadlift here, is if we want to make room to take breath with the hips high, extend your legs a little bit when you take that breath, right? Like kick the hips up, push those knees out a little bit extra so they're maybe in line with or outside of your arms so that you can get a lot of room to take that big breath, and then clamp down on the breath through bracing and all that normal stuff. And then once you do, I want you to pull in a little bit more. Like right now, we're bracing with hips high, but then we're not really changing our position at all to start the pull, right? We just start with hips high. So with hips high, right, we have a pretty decent amount of like shear force on the back, which is going to cause it to round out a little bit, which is going to cause us to get a little bit sticky at the lockout. If, however, once you take that breath with the hips high, you bring those hips down a little bit, let those knees forwards, you're going to get your trunk and your back angle just that little bit more upright, and it's going to change from being as much shear force to being a little more compressive force, right? Because we're going to be slightly more upright. That should allow us to maintain a better back angle, should allow us to lose a little bit less back position off the floor, and may end up with a bit better pull overall. Right now, it kind of looks like we're doing a pretty stiff-legged deadlift. Now, there are a lot of lifters for whom I should say, the stiff-legged deadlift is essentially what you want to be doing, right? Those lifters pull high-hipped, they're better high-hipped, just is what it is. But without knowing that you're one of those lifters, I would say let's try and get a little more wedged in. Like I said, knees forward, hips down. But when you think about wedging your hips down, I want you to make sure that we're wedging them kind of down and back so we don't, again, if we wedge the hips super far forward, we're just going to be getting more of this flexion. So yeah, those would be the biggest tips that I have for you. And I think, if we're going to be hips high to take the breath, make sure we're hips high. And then if that is high hips, Make sure to pull the hips down afterwards so that there's a difference between the two, right? Yeah. Other than that, I would say if we've gained weight or gone up a weight class or something like that, a lot of the times we're just going to get a little bit more flexion. We're going to get a little more rounded out. We're going to get a bit of a tougher lockout. So, hammer the pause deadlifts, deadlift against bands or chains. Any of those kinds of things are going to help you build that strength in the top end, because it might not be something that we can technically fix. It might not be a technique issue. So, who's next, Dill?
Last form check ever is Linus.
All right, Linus.
Linus has been lifting for 3 years and is 17 years old.
Okay.
He has had problems previously with a very extended back position during squats, and in result, making his hips shoot back and up. He still thinks his hips shoot up. How does he prevent this? Perhaps train more quads, or is there any cue or anything in his setup you think that could help? His best squat is 185 kilos in competition, and he's training for his next meet in September.
So the biggest thing I'm going to recommend here, Linus, because it looks like in these first few reps you're able to maintain your position quite well. Number one, just train with an intensity that allows you to execute the vast majority of your reps without this happening, right? If we're getting to the point where hips are shooting up, we're getting way out of whack, we're, losing position, we're losing the technique that we're trying to build, then we're training with a little bit too high of an intensity. I think overall bracing looks quite good. The biggest reason that I think we're running into this issue is because we're getting really loose in the bottom position. I think if you practice a lot of tempo, paused, and pin squats, you're gonna find that not only are those gonna be very hard variations for you because of how aggressively we're kind of loosening into the bottom here, right? Especially on rep 2. I also, looks like to me, if we looked at this from the front, we'd be seeing the knees cave in quite a bit. So a couple different fixes for that. If you're cueing your knees out, let them just go straight forward. A lot of times we overdo the knees out cue. We can start coming back up. They come in, and then they end up going more in because there's this big dynamic change and swing in the position as we go through it. So, that's one of the things. But the biggest thing is just going to be controlling that bottom position, learning how to, break inertia out of the bottom position, and relying less on strictly the stretch reflex, strictly that bounce to try to get up. I think beyond that, honestly, man, you're squatting, what did you say, 180? 185 at 17. You're a strong guy already. I didn't even lift when I was that age. So I think just take your time with the progression. Try not to get ahead of yourself. Don't spend too much time looking at other lifters on social media and being like, oh, there's this 16-year-old on TikTok deadlifting 800 pounds or whatever. That kind of stuff can be useful inspiration, but it can also be one of the worst things for your mental health. Comparison's the thief of joy and all that good stuff. But yeah, work on the control on the bottom, work on keeping those knees forward. I would double down on the quad training. I think that's a good point, and that's definitely something I would try to implement as much as I can without impacting your recovery negatively. But yeah, those would be kind of the ways that I would go about trying to bring that up and adjust that technique. And with that, we're gonna sign off. There's gonna be a lot more coming on the channel. I'm not gonna sit here and hype it up because I think Dylan and I both cringe at the thought of being a little too wait till you see what's coming next. But we're working on some stuff. Channel should be changing for the better in a lot of ways soon. And we hope you enjoyed Form Check Fridays. And if you do, make sure to go sub to the Form Check Friday channel. Once we have a little bit more time and resources, we're gonna be getting them going on a separate channel, probably less frequently, but I've had too many people come up to me over the years and say, Form Check Friday really helped me, or I got into powerlifting from Form Check Friday, or whatever. So, if that's you, thanks for saying so, because that really makes my day anytime I hear that. I don't know. I'm gonna stop jabbering now, but lots more coming on CBB. Stay tuned. We got some new apparel coming. It's exciting. We'll talk to y'all in the next one. Bye.